Wonderful. Thank you so much, Pavla, and thank you everyone for coming. I'm really excited to be with you and share these ideas. So today I'm going to talk about speculative design normalization. And this will be an introduction to speculative design and what it is and how it works. And also to talk about what I think is the ethical imperative that we all have a responsibility to spend more time thinking about the future. So a little bit about me. I'm a service designer and a speculative designer, and I sort of wear three hats. I run a consulting firm, Neeley Worldwide, where I work with a lot of different types of clients practicing these approaches. I also teach. I teach at the School of Critical Design and have also taught at the Royal College of Art for 10 years on the service design course, and I've taught at London Business School. And I also love to make things. So I love to, I've worked on projects like the optimization of happiness. I've worked on projects around improving civil discourse, and even worked on an early AI project about almost 15 years ago. So I love to be in kind of startup mode and building and shipping products and services. On my consulting side, I'm really interested in how these approaches can create meaningful impact. So I've worked on projects in the United States, like the world's first virtual hospital, beautiful building, hundreds of doctors and nurses, and no patients, all the care being provided remotely to small area hospitals or patients at home. I've worked with the UK government on preventing homelessness. So instead of treating someone when they're on the street and unhoused, can we find risk earlier and support them before they end up on the street? But I've worked, with projects with Microsoft and Honda. I've engaged with groups like Google X. All to say, I've seen these approaches work in many different domains with many different types of companies, and I'm a real believer in their ability to create impact. So today I want to start with the question, how can we better understand and create the future? And I want to share a little bit of theory to how I think about this. So speculative design, as a practice, is the design of future products and services to explore the implications of emerging technology or trends. You may have heard it called design fiction or design futures, critical design, speculative futures. I'm not too worried about the different names. It's often just a focus of the practitioner. But I tend to use speculative design with the companies that I work with. And for me, it started from the work of professors Tony Dunn and Fiona Raby at the Royal College of Art. And they introduced this idea of A and B, that most times in design and business, we're kind of a slave to industry. And really, that's operating within A. The near-term needs of the market are what drive our business. And they said, if we decouple design from the needs of industry, we can actually, and the needs of the market right now, we can use it to ask these interesting questions. So, and that's column B. We shift from providing answers to asking questions in the service of industry to in the service of society, from applications to implications, from training to education, from making us buy to making us think, from innovation to provocation. So speculative design sits in this B column, and much more exploratory. And one of the reasons I think this is so important, this work is so important, there's an idea called Amara's Law. And Amara's Law suggests that when we look into the future, we tend to think in a linear fashion. But actually, most technology and social and cultural shifts happen in an exponential fashion. And what that means is most people in these early moments of a new technology will dismiss it. They'll ignore it. That virtual reality headset is kind of janky. It makes me a little sick, and I can dismiss it. I'm not bothered by it. Well, with speculative design in the future, there's a moment of inflection where actually the reality is radically different than our expectation. So, with my work on speculative design, I work out here to try to improve companies' preparedness for those moments beyond that inflection point. So they really understand what this future reality with an exponential shift can be. So another model that we use a lot in speculative design is future cones. And this is a view of probabilities. How likely is any future to happen? And there are some futures that are very probable. It's kind of business as usual. This is where we're headed. There are futures that are less likely, but still plausible. And there are futures that are very, very unlikely, but they're still possible. Um, and so with speculative design, we tend to design different products and services at different distances into the future and different degrees of probability. And the goal is to kind of illuminate all of the different possibilities. So my goal is to really have a sense of what every possibility could be. And giving that to decision makers and to leaders allows us, and to society, allows us to have a conversation about what's preferable. What do I want to accelerate towards? What do I want to avoid? What do I want the future to look like? Another build on this that I think is really important is that the future is happening to us faster and faster. So if you think about during the Enlightenment, we suddenly had the printing press, we suddenly had a population that was becoming more literate, and suddenly the speed at which ideas could move around the world and could happen radically increased to history before. And this happened again with the Industrial Revolution. Now we could move materials around the world by steam. We had the steam engine and other types of machinery. We also could communicate by things like teletype. So again, ideas, materials, everything could move faster than we had before. And with Web 1.0, now we have email and websites and whole textbooks and scientific papers, moving around the globe very quickly. And today we're in a very unique situation. You can have an idea on this call. You can work it up with an AI assistant. You can code the whole front end website. You can join TikTok and create messages that will reach, hundreds of thousands of people very, very quickly. You can send a message to teams in Asia and China and be manufacturing goods and services very, very quickly. So the speed at which the world can change and at which ideas can happen is very different than anything we've experienced before. And I think also this is the slowest it will ever go. The world will only become faster. But because of this, it means that we must be prepared for all potential possibilities. And because the future is coming faster, we have to really understand what those possibilities are. So I call that possibility dilation, and I think it's important to think about. So a few is and is not. Speculative design is not fantasy. We often engage with the scientists or the experts in a domain to understand what's really plausible. It's not utopic or dystopic. A lot of times when you see a movie about the future, it's either everything goes wrong, a disaster film, or it's an advertisement for a company where everything is perfect in the future. And speculative design tries to play in the middle, where things are quite messy and good is good and bad is bad and good, and we can't quite tell the difference. So it's this place where it's not quite clear in the middle that is much more interesting to explore. It's also about messy people. So a lot of times, we look at futures and we think people have been solved for. But actually, even with new technology, people are contradictory, mean, selfish, um, and at the same time compassionate and loving and caring. And so we have to understand how humans and how human emotion and human behavior will also exist in the futures we design. It's not predictive. Speculative design doesn't look to say this is the future. And this is where it is different from, say, foresight or other types of tools, which will try to create a probability. We think this future will happen with a 30% probability or an 80% chance that this will happen by a certain year. Speculative design is much more exploratory. And because of that, we always work in multiples. I never say this is the future that will happen. I say this is one option, this is another possibility, this is something else. Um, the approach is very useful in unclear contexts. Many times a business will not understand what impact a future new technology will have on their business. And so speculative design can help them understand that, can generate language and help them have a perspective on what might happen. We engage through prototypes, so we try to build the future. And again, this is where it's often different from a lot of strategy and foresight work, where the outcomes are still quite abstract. And in speculative design, we actually try to build prototypes that people could touch and feel and explore. So we make the future very tangible. We're also looking for new answers by asking questions about what might be or what might happen and changing perspectives on that. And ultimately, speculative design is about reframing our understanding of today and what's possible. Once you have new visions of the future, it really changes, how a company thinks about what they're doing right now. Why are we arguing about this feature or this bit of code or this approach when these other things are coming down the pipe around the corner? Um, so that's a bit of theory there, but I really believe that speculative design can help us explore, better understand, and then create the future. So I want to give you some more kind of examples of how this works and sort of the process and some case studies. So the big question that often comes with this is I love exploring the future. I love seeing concept cars, I love seeing future concepts from companies, but does it generate any value? Why would I think about the future when my organization has so many challenges today and so many problems right now? So I want to show you how I think this works and how I've seen this work. So one is that speculative design uses the exact same design approach that you would use in other disciplines. So I use kind of a three diamond model here, but there's a phase of research where we explore what are the possibilities of a new technology, what's happening in the industry. We then go through a design phase where we create products and services that could exist. The only difference, instead of delivering and shipping products and services or software today, is we are looking at new strategy or new roadmaps or future research, product and service implications. So the process is the same. The only difference is that we don't move into implementation. We have different kind of outcomes for that process. But your design skills in whatever you're doing now or your business skills are incredibly transferable and in fact essential for speculative design work. Really, the only shift is our time horizon. And this is always interesting. I'll talk to some companies and I'll ask, well, what is the future to you? And usually maybe they have a 2 or a 5 year plan. Sometimes I've talked to development groups or architecture that will look at a building over, say, a 30 to 50 year lifespan. But I've even talked with software teams that'll say, well, what's your future? And they'll say, well, 2 weeks. We're pushing code twice a day. We kind of know what we're doing for the next 2 weeks, but beyond that, we don't have a perspective. So what I've found is by allowing people to design products and services that are 10 years or 15 years into the future, that decouples them from all the problems and challenges of the business today or from the industry or the technology. And it allows them to think very creatively and very differently about what's next. I find if you go too far into the future, it can be hard for people to connect back to their work and their life and how they're living now. But there's sort of a magic sweet spot beyond all of the plans of the organization as they are today, but still close enough that people can connect back into what they're doing and how they're living now. Another model that I think is really important is, I'm a service designer, and a lot of the kind of thesis of service design was that if we take any product and then we begin to zoom out, the phone, for example, isn't just this device. but actually there's a beginning. There's an Apple store. There's a whole experience that I can have before I even buy the product. Then there's a transfer moment where I'm transferring my existing data onto the new device. There's an unboxing experience that happens that's all been designed. I can live with the device, and there are all sorts of services that I use over time. And then there's an end of life, and there's an upgrade, and there's all of this. But that multiple interactions over time to create an experience has proven to have a lot of value. And service design is now kind of 25 years into this experiment of having impact in a lot of places. So zooming out from product to service creates a lot of value. And in service design now we talk a lot about systems. If I'm designing a hospital, I can't actually just consider the hospital. I have to consider how it connects to local health institutions. I have to consider policy. I have to consider, even things like food and well-being and exercise. So zooming out from a particular service to actually a systems understanding increases the quality of the decisions we make. So I would suggest that this never ends, that every time you zoom out and take in more information about the system, you make better decisions about any product or service that you're designing within that system. And so this expansion of our purview improves our decision making. And I would suggest that the future is just another way of looking at this. In speculative design, we go out into the future, we create products and services, we learn about what possibilities are there, and we bring that information back into the present to make better decisions. So again, this is another type of expansion of purview, but now instead of from a systems level, it's from a temporal level, from time and looking into the experience. And I think the same is probably true of the past. By looking back into the past at what has been done and what learning happened and how we avoid, mistakes of the past is another space of valuable information. So the process tends to go kind of in this mode. We start with a signal. This could be a new technology or a new report from a university or a new launch from a company that suggests some new affordance in the future. And then we look at that new affordance against a focus. So self-driving cars might be the signal, but what does that mean for the city center? Or what does that mean for a hotel? Now, when I can sleep in my car and drive overnight to new destinations, right? So the focus is what place of impact or origin of impact will that signal land and what we're exploring. We then create future scenarios. And this area kind of all sits within strategy and research foresight. Many times I'm working with companies that already have these expertise in-house and will pick up their research and work, trend forecasting, scenario planning, etc. Then we move into speculative design. So if that future scenario exists, what are the products and services that my company will offer in that future? What do they look like? How people experience them? Let's design that. And that is a design and a business function, right? We're creating products and services. Then we go to implications. And implications is we want to interrogate the design. Well, what does it mean? What do we like? What don't we like? How does this work, right? And that's really a research function, a user research function, where we're understanding how people react to a particular idea. And then the final piece is all of this information comes back into strategy. Because we've learned this about the future, how will we change our business or our operations today? What has shifted because we have this new perspective? So again, foresight and strategy. We've got design and business, product management. We've got user research, and then we have strategy, leadership teams, etc. So all those skill sets kind of come together and often are already existing within an organization that we can support through speculative design. So this is a more detailed map of that same process. And just two ideas here. One is to say that there are a number of kind of techniques and tools that we'll use over and over again. Things like the future wheel, things like backcasting. But the main point I want to make is a lot of times when people think about speculative design or design futures or design fiction, they think about the concept car. They think about the shiny future thing that shows up on the website and the beautiful image. And I would suggest that's only half of the work. When once you go out into the future and create that speculative design, then a lot of the work and the hard part starts. Now we have to interrogate it. We have to ask about implications. We have to generate learnings and principles from that. We then have to backcast. And then the most important question is our strategy. What are the product and service implications today? What new partnerships, what new research should we be doing? What shifts right now because we have this new perspective on the future. So I call this closing the loop. So if you ever kind of see a future concept, just remember you're only halfway there. Now we must begin that process of getting back to today and understanding how things shift. So quick tools that I think are really helpful is just a future wheel, which is really just a brainstorm. It's a spider diagram where we start with a signal, so a new technology, say self-driving cars, and we look at it against a focus, say hotels, and then we begin to look at, well, what are the direct consequences of that? So this might impact how many guests are traveling overnight by car. This might impact the type of services we need to offer to support self-driving cars or electric recharging, right? And then there are knock-on implications. Well, do we need to have expertise in self-driving cars and maybe maintenance or other things? Are there any laws or legal implications to this? We have a lot of rules in cities like Barcelona now fighting back against Airbnb. Might we have new types of rules when hundreds of cars are driving into cities with people who have slept the night and are now visiting the city for the day? Where do we place those cars, right? So we just are brainstorming the direct implications and then the knock-on implications. And for me, this is much more interesting than just looking at the technology. I want to understand, well, how is this going to impact things in the future? You can think about this like taking a stone and throwing it into a pond and watching it, out into the future, watching it land in 2035, and then just watching the ripples, watching those knock-on effects from that technology. So that can be a great tool. Another quick and useful tool we call implications pie. And it's basically whenever you see a future concept or are thinking about a future concept, this is the start of the interrogation. So we always ask, well, what's the human experience? What would it be like to live with that? How would I use it? How would it be like? What would it look like in my life? We can also then zoom out and say, well, what are the social, cultural, technological, ethical, economic, environmental, political? What are the knock-on effects and the wider implications of this technology or this new product and service? And then my favorite is, how does it go wrong? What are there's the great quote from Paul Virilio, the invention of the ship was the invention of the shipwreck. So what new shipwrecks exist because this product and service now lives in the world? So that can be very useful to kind of go through those questions whenever you see a sort of future vision or product or service or concept from the future. So a few examples, just really quick. One from Elliott Montgomery and the Extrapolation Factory in New York City. They did a great project with the Department of Emergency Management in New York City. They looked at what future kind of disaster preparedness might be. And in this case, the designers reimagined infrastructure from the city. So you can see a phone booth there in the background. This is a checkpoint going into a subway. And here these are actors that are playing out roles and scenarios in front of the leadership of the Office of Emergency Management and community members and others to kind of talk about what this might mean and how do our future emergency preparedness plans translate into some of these types of scenarios, and being able to see that. The UK Policy Lab has been using this a lot. This is a design group inside government that looks to use design to improve the way policy is developed. and they have used a lot of speculative design. In this case, looking at future shipping and the future of shipping when we have smart ships and electric ships and AI sensors. What is the future of shipping? How does this impact logistics and ports and other things in the UK? And how can policy be kind of smartly written to address that? There's a great project. I won't go into it too much, but just to say this was a project called the Selfish Ledger from Google. And it was meant as an internal kind of thinking provocation. It slipped out into the real world. Some people read it as a bit dystopic, but it was really an internal challenge, a speculative design to ask, well, what are the tools that we're building? What do they mean in the future? And I think for me, this is a great validation to get a little taste in some of the companies. Speculative design is being done to help inform these conversations. And we don't always see it in the real world, but it is there. This was a great speculative project from a number of years ago, a classmate of mine, and I wanted to share it because I really think it's quite relevant today. These were three devices that he designed, imagining what the future would be when AI assists us in our communication. So the device in black here, it's worn around the neck and it looks out a little as a little screen and it speaks for you. So you talk to it and it writes it speaks on your behalf. The yellow device is something you look at and it listens to the conversations and then it prompts you on what to say and how you should speak in different scenarios. And the last device that I loved, it's something you set on a table, it listens to the conversation and it competes for your attention. And so it tries to be more interesting than the person you're talking to. And what's really interesting about these is this was, 15, 16 years ago that these devices were kind of designed. But this is absolutely the case right now in many of our interactions with AI. I'm finding that with friends sometimes, people are almost romantically speaking about their interactions with AI. That they can jump from philosophy to world news to deep coding problems. These are conversations that in many instances, can't keep up with. And so we're almost in that moment where AI is competing for attention, and we're maybe not quite as interesting as what these types of agents can provide to people. This is another, so again, a provocation that I think is really useful. This is a project a few years ago from Move Lab and Mercedes-Benz, and we were looking at self-driving cars and how they might impact the city. And one of the things that was interesting is Mercedes-Benz seemed to have a real grasp on the self-driving car itself, the sensors and production, and they had plans for where they were going on it. But we realized they really hadn't considered the knock-on implications, the impact on the city. So Where Do Cars Go at Night was a children's book from the future where a little boy is dropped off at home from a self-driving car. And then he asks the car, he says, well, where do you go at night? And the car kind of narrates this story. Well, we used to go to parking garages, but now those have all been transformed into shops and theaters. And I deliver groceries and packages, and we clean the streets, and we go for repairs and charging, right? So you started to get a picture of all of the implications for the city. And the team published the book. They printed, 1,000 of them and gave them out across the company. And it really started a lot of interesting conversations from teams at legal, from new types of business models. And it won it won a German design award for kind of its impact and conversation there. This TellArt is another team, a studio that's done a lot of really interesting work. This was a project from the Museum of the Future. Now there's a permanent Museum of the Future in the UAE, and kind of this was a yearly collection of projects from the future that could kind of help policymakers and leaders in industry think about what might become as some of these technologies get realized. So just to say, happening at different kind of levels in impact and scale and becoming again normalized in a now permanent exhibition. I wanted to share this project really quickly. This is from Superflux, and this is air of the future. So they took all of that data from policy. If we don't address climate change, if we don't address pollution, and this allows you to actually breathe the air of the future, and it makes you cough, and it's not very pleasant. And suddenly, policymakers have a visceral feel for the negative implications of not addressing climate change and pollution, and that changes how they understand the data, and it changes what they want to do. So we often work in the language of the company we're working with. This is from the Near Future Laboratory and an IKEA catalog. So imagining what IKEA will be delivering in the future and helping them think through their products and services, but again, in a format that's familiar. So just to say, I've done a lot of this work over the last 15 years, from global telecoms companies, global mobility companies, Fortune 500 retailers, global healthcare groups, all under NDA and kind of behind the scenes. But just to say it is happening. And we're starting to see more notice of it, particularly in business settings. So Harvard Business Review a few years ago now, using fiction to find your strategy, all about design fiction, speculative design, and acknowledgments that traditional foresight and a lot of the planning are no longer working. And so CEOs are looking for these new methods for planning, and speculative design and sort of an illumination of future possibilities becomes one of those tools that is very useful. So speculative design creates value by creating empathy. We're creating a tangible future experience. We're looking at the implications rather than applications, and we can interrogate the future concept and understand our reactions to it. It's a creative space. You free teams up to not worry about the constraints of the world as it is right now, but think about how things might be different in the future. And this is perfect for dreaming. It's perfect for creating thought leadership. And finally, this enhances your decision making. If you create a discussion space through speculative design, if you create a perspective on unclear context, if you create radical alternatives to how the company or how the business or how the products and services operate now, you allow for kind of a triangulation to what is preferred, and you change your understanding of risk. You're hedging against some of the risky decisions that are happening today without kind of being informed by possibilities in the future. So my call again is more please to all of this. And there are a lot of great places, a few texts you can read if you're interested in exploring more in this. I also have tried to pack everything I've learned into speculative design basics that we've taught for a number of years to help, again, normalize the practice that everyone should understand speculative design and be able to use it in whether it's business or strategy or research or design, new product development, innovation. It fits nicely alongside those expertise and how we can support it there. So the final thought I want to leave with you, and then we'll jump into question and answers, is the ethical imperative. So this was an example from a few years ago. A great designer in the States, Alan Cooper, and John Hancock is an insurance company, and they said that we will now only sell insurance to people who share their Fitbit or their personal wearable data with us, right? So if you're sitting on the couch all day, they're going to charge you very different premiums. And if you don't give them that data, they have no way of really understanding the insurance policy. And so he made a joke. He said, Arduino-powered artificial wrist that wears my Fitbit and tells my insurance company I'm doing fine. And it got everyone kind of laughed. That would be very funny. But I had already seen this. This was my classmate at the Royal College of Art, Stefan Felder. And when the very first algorithms came out that could detect if you were walking or running or cycling, when those first algorithms came out, he kind of, through a speculative design, realized that this would be one of the outcomes. And so this was a device you could put your phone down on it, and it would just bounce your phone in a walking motion. He even had a running, you could turn it up and it would run. I think he even had a drunken stupor that would kind of randomly bounce your phone like you're coming home late at night from the pub. And he made videos of him, eating a pizza and drinking a beer on the sofa while his phone was on a 5K run. So it's about anticipation, right? The speculative design lets us understand this long before it hits the market. ChatGPT-2 from OpenAI was not released to the public because they worried that the text generator was maybe too dangerous. And for me, this is a total failure of business to have created something and not to have anticipated the negative outcomes and not to have put in guardrails or safety or understood what this looks like in the future is a huge problem. And so speculative design avoids this by creating anticipation. We should never be creating things that we put into the market that we haven't thought through and mitigated for the negative outcomes. And here we are, nothing's really been done on this front. And here we are on 4.5 and the Opus models, and now, stories of mythos in the world from Anthropic. So this only gets worse. But again, anticipation, speculative design become more important. This is particularly true in climate change terms. And a few years ago, an op-ed suggested it's actually time for catastrophic thinking. We're now past 1.5. 2 degrees of warming seems baked in, and there are tipping points that may quickly lead us to 3 or 4 degrees. And we haven't yet imagined just how kind of catastrophic some of these changes are. Speculative design is another way that allows us to work through those future possibilities and really sit with the implications and then design and model our businesses for today based on that. So it's an anticipation that I think helps makes me feel more prepared. So again, I put this into every one of my presentations, but just a gentle reminder of whatever you're working on right now is probably not as important as addressing global warming. So kind of the global context that we're all operating within. So the final two takes here, I think, in terms of climate change, we're in a moment that is could possibly become one of the most creative, meaningful, and transcendent in human history, just simply because we must. The amount of changes that are taking place right now from climate change, but also from this wave of AI and robotics, from global instability, all of these things are requiring us to think very differently about the future. And I think it's an opportunity to reimagine everything. And there's a huge space for really, again, as the quote here suggests, a meaningful, transcendent era ahead as we take the opportunity. So the final thought here, and this is my build on Tony Dunn and Fiona Raby. Not only as we disconnect from industry is it interesting to explore this, but actually it's essential that speculative design creates real important impact in the world. And that's what C represents. We're not just asking questions, we're generating wisdom. It's from implications to impact. It's not satire, it's deadly serious. From education to enlightenment, from making us think to making us act, from provocation to restitution, from rhetoric to action. So for me, speculative design and this speculative design normalization is about everyone spending more time in the future using these techniques to create meaningful impact today. So I just want to thank you so much for the opportunity to share these thoughts, and hopefully something there resonated. And I hope each of you in your work and your practice, the companies you're working for, the things you're designing, you'll take an opportunity to really think about the future and then use that exploration to really enhance the way you're designing today and the types of choices you're making. So thank you so much. And yeah, I would love to take some questions or if anyone has some thoughts they'd like to share.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much. This was absolutely fascinating. And we have a couple of questions in the chat and also some raised hands. So just in order to keep this orderly, let's maybe give the people who have posted the questions in the chat the chance to read them out loud themselves. And we could start out with Matthew Injika, who has asked the question. Matthew, if you want to, you can unmute yourself and ask the question directly. Otherwise, I would just read it out. Give it a second.
I
Okay.
could maybe answer that quite quickly. I've just read his question, looking at yeah how you go from speculative design into create um, kind of concrete projects and work to deliver. So I hope I talked about that a bit, but really the closing the loop is the important piece there. So the speculative design, the future thing, is not necessarily something we'd ever build. But we use that to come back to our current strategy. And so then we're asking questions because we've seen that future. What there may be new products or services we offer today. There may be new features. There may be a new business model we want to explore, new partnerships. So it's really about less about if that speculative design is something we would build, and more about because we experienced that, what will our strategy be now? So that conversation is what's key. My favorite thing is when you see a future uh, product or service, and then you realize actually a lot of that isn't that futuristic. We could deliver some of that straight away. And so I'm always excited when teams realize, oh, there's a feature we saw here. We never thought to explore it, but we realize now that we've seen it and touched it, we can implement that right away.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
At the same time, we can see that a lot of the speculative design artifacts kind of end up in museums and in these very controlled environments.
Yes, yes. And that I think a lot of speculative design kind of emerged in a space that sort of straddled that art design world. And the artifacts, you're right, the end result would sit in a museum or a gallery. And I think my work, again, my whole focus of my studio has been on how does speculative design work in industry settings with companies and creating value in that world. And so so hopefully you got a little perspective today on it can absolutely work in that world. So yeah, the artifacts get celebrated in galleries and in that way. But I think in industry it becomes more of a thinking tool, and often they never see the light of day. They're only used internally, but still very powerful.
Yeah. Fantastic. Our second question concerns the methodologies, and there's a specific question regarding the use of wordly mapping, but maybe you can take it a little bit broader. And you mentioned futures wheels, but maybe you can also explore on some of the other tools that you reach for.
Yeah, that's great. No, so there are a lot of different tools, particularly for mapping trends and mapping futures, and a lot of things that come from the sort of foresight and strategy world. And as a speculative designer, I'm kind of just borrowing bits and pieces from that world and finding what works. And mainly that's because there are many experts in that space. And a lot of times with the company, they'll have already used different tools to map the future and create their scenarios and map trends. And my starting point is their strategy deck. So they have an 80-page, look to the future, and there are several scenarios in there. And then we will start there to build products and services that exist in those scenarios. So I a couple of thoughts. So yeah, I don't think speculative designers often are using that space for inspiration, and there's a lot of expertise in that space. My one contention with a lot of foresight is that they tend to try to, again, predict the future, and I just think it's impossible. So anytime someone says, 50% likelihood or 32% likelihood, I'm really turned off. I use all of that work for inspiration. And even if something has a 1% possibility or probability of happening, I think it's still worth designing and exploring because that's a huge space for inspiration. So I think we can learn from those worlds and those expertise, but I think speculative design can sit in this space of making those tangible, allowing people to touch them in some way.
Yeah.
So
And it also
complementary. Yeah,
and it also teaches us something about the present, right? Like when like the kind of futures that people envision and everything that does tell us a lot about that as well.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. We have the next question by a raised hand by Vojta. Vojta, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, hello. I want to ask, what is the path to become a speculative designer? I mean, uh, UX designers or designers in general are kind of a speculative designers because we are looking into future, just not 5 years or 10 years ahead, but more like 1 or 2 years ahead. So how do you go from looking just so close in future to looking into this much of future?
Yeah, perfect. Great question. Great question. So one, I don't think there's any gatekeeping. You don't need to study speculative design exactly. You really it's just about doing the work. And you've articulated it already. You have a particular brief, often as a UX designer, that's situated in 1 or 2 years into the future, right? And it sets a context, what the technology will be, what the users might need. So the only thing we're doing is changing the context. So now we're going to say, okay, now you're 15 years in the future. AI, the price of intelligence is almost zero. And the price of robotics has now gone way down. And now you ask about a particular question. What do hotels look like? What does the booking experience look like in that world? So you use all your UX design skills now to create that interface of the future. And with that new context, you'll have very different ideas, right? You don't have any of the limitations that you have to deal with now. So really, that's the shift. You do exactly the same type of process you go through now to design products and services, but we have a different context. And you're then very free to imagine and operate in that context.
Thank you.
Let's maybe
Great.
stick to the AI angle for a little bit longer. And that is, do you use any sort of AI tools with when you're preparing your artifacts and your mockups? And what is the role of AI nowadays in the creative process?
Yeah, I mean, well, as you know, it's changing everything on the prototyping side. So using a lot of it for images and using a lot of it for, mocking up websites or interactions. So all of this now, it allows you to create a tangibility for people to see or to be able to touch, where in the past maybe that took longer or was more expensive, or companies were stuck with teams that maybe couldn't sketch or maybe didn't have those abilities. Now we've got all of that available. So yeah, I think it's impacting all of these spaces. It's very, very useful in speculative design spaces. The one thing I would say there are a lot of kind of visual tropes of the future. That there's sort of if you ask AI to imagine the future, it does a very poor job of it. Everything is like Tron, blue lights and wires everywhere. It's a very particular view of what the future looks like. So when you're prompting for future designs, you really have to be careful to avoid any of those things that become kind of AI future slop. You want something that fits much better in the context you're designing for. But yeah, very helpful for speeding up those approaches.
Yeah. Maybe a related question to that would be that, when you're using AI, there's like the training data that already embeds all of the things that exist in the world. And then at the
Yeah.
same time, humans have like recency biases and availability biases. Do you have any techniques when selecting features to kind of counterweight those?
Yeah, so for example, with signals, many times these would be things that are happening in the world that might impact the future. Many times we start with a trend report. So, a team has already tried to analyze everything in the world and say these are the trends we should focus on. For me, I tend to be very kind of strategic about what trends I want to pull to look at, what signals. And I will look at a company and say, I don't think they're paying attention to climate change. I don't think they're having no discussions internally about, say, AI. And so I will find signals that I think are very provocative or challenging for the company. So that can, I think, be a good check with our own, anytime we're looking at a set of emerging technologies that we think will impact the future, what are we missing? What are we not paying attention to? For example, I think I saw Paul Graham of Y Combinator on Twitter recently remarked that he was kind of worried about the AMOC collapse. This is the current in the Atlantic that keeps Europe quite mild temperatures. And it looks like this current is going to collapse in the next 75 or 100 years. And he was quite worried about that. But for me, it was kind of Silicon Valley hasn't really worried about this for 20 years. They've sort of ignored this. So I look to be complete, and then I try to pick things that I think are, we're not paying attention to. So just asking that question of yourself, what am I not paying attention to that will be impacting the future can lead to some interesting areas.
Do you also try to balance like positivity and negativity in your scenarios? Because I feel like that when it comes to climate change, there can be a lot of, let's say, negative sentiments around it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it is good to balance. I think it's good to, as you're creating that spread of the future, you want to find things that will be positive or will be, will work out well, and to highlight the horrors, that catastrophic thinking to highlight how bad it will be. The thing for me is often again in the middle. We often say that the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. And I also think positivity and negativity are also in the future not evenly distributed. So, and I want to highlight that. What is positive about this, but what is negative simultaneously, or what will be ideal for our industry, but could impact other industries negatively? So I think it's important to not see them just as the extremes, but to also, see the mix in the middle there.
Alrighty, I believe that we have space for one more question, and that is already in the chat. And this is about the eternal tension between futures and foresight. And that is if you use scenario planning techniques in speculative design and if they work for you, or do you just see them more as a foresight methods? And how does this interplay?
Yeah. So I do. Again, I do that full front end. I will pick a signal and I will create a future scenario based on it. But I do it in quite a lightweight way. In fact, the simplest way for me, I will do almost a three-sentence future scenario. And I think about it like a movie trailer. That voice that kicks off at the front of a movie trailer, in the year 2035, when AI has taken over all human labor. That sort of voice that sets up the scenario for the movie, I think is really useful. So can I think of two or three sentences that create the scenario, and then I will create my products or services that the company might offer in that world. So that's the lightest weight approach. And again, I'm using it as a jumping off point for inspiration. I think the foresight techniques that develop really, really elaborate scenarios are great and, vetted and researched, I think are wonderful. Again, my one challenge with a lot of them is they're still very vague, and it's really hard to understand. So it's like everyone will self-driving cars will exist on 80% of our roads. Again, I don't know what that means exactly. I don't know how there are 1,000 ways you could experience that, utopic and dystopic. And so I think for me, again, it's useful to put us in a general area with the scenario, but the speculative design is what grounds it and what really, makes the 1,000 decisions to say this is what it will look like, or this is how we will experience it. Yeah, great question.
Brilliant. I believe we're on the top of the hour. There's still some questions in the chat, so I'm not sure if we do have space to tackle them as well.
I'm happy to grab one more, a couple more.
Alrighty, there's one that's getting likes in the chat, so that's always a
Okay.
good sign. And that's the one about what about collaboration during the process and who gets invited to speculate and how do you choose whom to include?
Yeah, this is great. So again, part of the normalization is that I think everybody should be speculating. Everybody should be participating in speculative design. If you're a researcher, you can use speculative design to get reactions from people about what their feelings might be in the future. If you're in product and service and you're looking at new features or new products to ship, you should be thinking about the future. If you're a business leader, you have purview for the business and responsibility for the people within that business and to shareholders. You should be thinking about the future. So I really think, like all other processes, by taking in more information from many participants, we can improve the decisions we're making and the outcomes. And the other thing I'd say is a lot of times the futures seem designed for us by a particular set, in Silicon Valley. or a particular set coming out of a few European universities. But actually, I think all of us, have an opportunity to kind of craft and create the future. And so I'd encourage people to, add your own voice to what the future should look like. So yeah, more and everyone in terms of participation for the future.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for answering all of those questions. This is absolutely fantastic talk, and thank you for giving us your time and your insight to this.
Thank you so much for facilitating, and thank you for all the great questions. This is a lot of fun, and happy to continue the conversation if anyone wants to reach out.
There was one more question regarding whether you would be willing to share your presentation with the participants, but I believe that the logistics will be handled with the team holding the lecture. So,
Absolutely, we'll work that out and make sure people have the content.
and thank you so much, and thank you so much, everybody, for participating in today's masterclass.